following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Hello and welcome along the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network to another program in this series I call Ask Claire. My name is Claire Hall, and I get to talk with wonderful and interesting people about things that interest me, and so we go all over the map, but you know, one of the topics I keep returning to again and again is my favorite game, America's sport, baseball. And when I get to talk about my favorite player and manager, Gil Hodges, it's extra special. And extra special when I get to welcome a member of his family, his eldest daughter, Irene Hodges. Irene, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Claire, and thank you so much.
Well, we talked on this program last year trying to give folks a sense of what it was like to grow up with Gil Hodges, you know, not the ball player, not the manager that millions of people saw and many met, but something that really only your own family has shared, the sense of him as a family man, a dad, a husband, and I got a lot of good comments on that program, so I thought maybe if we could return to the theme a bit this program, but specifically look through the lens of that greatest of all years, my favorite year as a baseball fan, 1969, and the Miracle Mets. But I think to get there, we've got to at least go back to 1967. Now, by that point, he had been manager of the Washington Senators for almost 5 years, right?
Correct.
And the Senators, would you say, it's fair to say when he took over, you know, they were an expansion team. They were not really a very good team, but every single year they improved their record under his leadership. And that's got to be a tribute to, well, to the players, but also to his hard work and motivation and the leadership he brought to the team, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. He was a tremendous leader. And being a tremendous leader, he always wanted to bring out the best of his players. And in going to the Senators was a tremendous change for him. Washington wasn't a very big baseball city. They were tremendous in football. They were last place every year. But he felt it was a good stepping stone for him, a place to, you know, kind of get his feet wet in being manager. And I think he made the right decision in doing that.
Right, and you mentioned, Washington last place every year. One of the old lines in baseball was Washington first in war, first in peace, and last in the American League. But
there you go.
Again, on the improvement, the 5 years of improvement, I think that's maybe an unappreciated feat. Bill James, the guy who has brought new statistical analysis to baseball over the last 30 years or so, I remember one study he did that showed if a team improves from year one to year two, they are far more likely to slip back in year three. And so he said, you know, for a team to improve 3 years in a row or more is really an unusual thing. So let's take it now to the fall of 1967. And the Mets, who he had played for, his second and last team before retiring as a player, the Mets sent the contract of pitcher Bill Dennehy and $100,000 to the Senators to bring him on board as manager. And just, you know, your reaction, his reaction, your family's reaction when this deal was made.
It was a tremendous decision. Not a decision to come home, not a decision to be back in Brooklyn, but to manage a New York team He was concerned if he was ready for that. There was so much that entered into that decision. And as I've said so many times, Frank Slocum was his closest confidant. And he was the one that helped him go to Washington, thought it was a good move for him, and absolutely a good move to come back to New York. He felt he was ready. He had learned enough of the ropes of managing, but now he was coming back to start practically all over again with a team that is doing poorly. When he went to Washington, they were terrible, and he helped them slowly but surely get better, improve. Now he was starting all over again, with a team that wasn't even taken seriously. But he did it. He knew what it would entail for him. But he was tremendous. He believed in himself, and he believed that he could bring what he brought to the game to his players. And that's really, I believe, all he asked for, the best they can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have heard his players, say again and again that, how he did bring out the best in them. He did have them believing in themselves, believing in their abilities, maybe in a way that they hadn't seen before. And I think that is a very important and very rare gift in leadership, not just in sports, but really in any field. Wouldn't you think?
I agree. He was, my dad was a Marine, and
yes,
and I think that was such a strong part of his character, being that person, that Marine, and I think that projected into his life in every aspect. So,
yeah, as we've talked about in the past, my dad was a Marine too. And, I would very much say the same thing with my dad. He told me a Marine slogan was, we do the difficult right away. The impossible takes a little longer. So I guess you could say taking the Mets from last place or next to last place to world champion, he didn't do it in 1 year, but he did it in 2, which is still
pretty
amazing.
Remarkable to go from losing 78 games, winning 78 games, to winning 100 games in 1 year is phenomenal.
That is a huge leap. And, I'm thinking back to press pictures when he was hired, and there's a picture of him on the field, I think with Yogi Berra, Bing Devine, who was the general manager at the time, and he's got his Mets cap on. There's also a picture taken at your home, which I think is just a very neat picture. He's on the phone, and your mom, your brother, sisters, all surrounding him, and you've all got big smiles on your faces. And even though it might have been a post picture, the smiles just just seem very genuine, and that I suppose nobody could know the great adventure that was beginning.
No, absolutely not. Nobody had any idea what was going to come.
Yeah. So then comes 1968 and spring training. And, one quote I've seen, and you mentioned what a really terrible team the Mets were. And I think in those early years, they almost tried to play up the image of the lovable losers. But one quote from him was, losing isn't funny. It's a sickness.
Yep.
That he came in right from the start, setting new expectations. And, there's, I think, him leading everybody in workouts, and he's doing the same exercises, and the coaches are with him. And And from everything I've read, that just right from the start, he set a whole new tone. And 1968, they were still a ninth place team, but again, you read that they really showed so many flashes of potential, and some of the smarter sports writers were saying, this Mets team is going places.
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe one of the first clubhouse meetings my dad had was, we're not clowns. Losing is not fun. Losing is not acceptable. I don't expect you to win every game, but I expect you to do your best every game. And I think that basically set the tone of what he wanted and expected from his men.
Mm-hmm. And, do you feel like to some degree the fans, because, he was so beloved in New York, that there was kind of a honeymoon with him coming back, and did that help maybe take a little bit of pressure off of him, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. I don't think that. I think if anything, he felt more obligated for the fans. He felt, I believe, that New York deserved a good ball team, and he wanted to give that to them. He didn't want them to have jokers on the field. He wouldn't accept that ever.
Right. And I guess one good thing in timing, you could say that the Mets did have some very good young players coming up, and especially Tom Seaver comes to mind, but also Jerry Koosman, Bud Harrelson.
They had a tremendous pitching staff, without a doubt. Tremendous.
Yes, and it's kind of interesting, the great Brooklyn Dodger teams of the 40s and 50s that he was such an important part of. Their greatest strength was in their hitting, but with the Mets, his greatest, their greatest strength was the pitching. They had enough hitting, obviously, to get the job done. Maybe we should talk about his coaching staff, too. Another attribute of, I think, of good leaders is they always surround themselves with smart people. And certainly, I think, he brought Rube Walker over from Washington as his pitching coach, and he's remembered as such an outstanding pitching coach. But the manager can't do it all. He sets the tone and the expectations, but just the thoughts on his coaches, if you have any.
He was very fortunate. He had coaches that knew him well, knew what he wanted from his coaches and what they would get from their players. Rube was his right-hand man, without a doubt. Rube knew him as well, knew what he wanted, knew what he expected. He was a great, great pitching coach. Joe Pignatano, we've known our whole lives. We grew up with his family as well as ours. Eddie Yost, great man, quiet, but did his job. They were all very, very good in every respect that he needed them to be. So he was fortunate because he could rely on them to get his message across at any time.
A good leader has a good leadership team under him, or a great leader. And so 1969 dawned, and I was still a preteen. You were a teen, but gosh, there was. That's probably the first summer that I really followed baseball every single day. And I remember in the beginning of the season, my thought is, when the sports writers, they always have to have their preseason predictions. And if I remember correctly, they were saying, okay, this young Mets team has a lot of potential, and they're on the rise, but nobody picked them to win it all. And I think, the Las Vegas odds makers famously put them at 100-1 to win the World Series that year.
Absolutely.
But they just went out
stars.
every day, and they won. And just your perspective as a daughter, as a fan, and kind of watching that magical year unfold.
As the time got closer and closer to the end of the season, we never really spoke about it at home. It was a quiet feeling of excitement, but never was, well, do you think you're going to make it, or do you think they could do it? Never. Every game was just another game, getting closer to the fact that it might happen. But he never spoke about it at home. Until
he was a very self-contained man, huh? I'm sorry.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah.
He was strong. He was very strong-willed, but he was very quiet. He was very, very quiet about some things. So. Yeah,
very much the opposite of a lot of figures in sports today, not just baseball, where, I could never imagine your dad saying, I am the greatest.
Never.
But,
Never.
No. But just leaping ahead, and I want to go back through the end of the season, the playoffs and the World Series. This 50th anniversary of that wonderful season has brought some new books about the Mets, and there's one by a writer named Wayne Coffey, who is a young teenager, and it's really been, I really enjoyed it, probably best of all of them. And one of the quotes I hadn't run across before was one sports writer, after it's all over and the MVP award had been given, and asked which do I remember correctly? Don Clendenin?
Don Clendenin, right.
Yes. And he said some very praiseworthy things about Don Clendenin, and deservedly so, but again, really emphasized that everyone had contributed, and said maybe all the players and the coaches should have cars. And then the reporter said, what about the manager? And your dad said, the manager already has a car.
Wow. I can tell you one story that will sum up my dad. After we won the World Series, it was bedlam beyond anything I had ever seen or been a part of. And we were in my dad's office. My family, Jerry Kuzman came in with his whole family. It was just huge. It was just so much excitement. I mean, everybody on top of the world. And my mother said to my dad, Gil, why don't you call your mother? And my father looked for a minute, and he looked at my mother, and he said, Joan, that's a long-distance call. I think I should make that from home. Now, that's what I remember of him, sitting on top of the world. I mean, just winning the 69 World Series. And still never once would he ever think of taking advantage of any situation. And that, to me, is who he was.
He
wouldn't make a long-distance call from his office. He waited till he got home to call his mom.
Wow. I bet Mrs. Payson wouldn't have minded if he did, but because it would go against his sense of honor and integrity and doing what's right.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's very powerful. That is so powerful. So what a season it was. And like you said, they win 100 games in the regular season. Of course, they held off the Cubs, really. I think if there, and we haven't even mentioned, this was the first year of divisional play in the National League. And I think if there was a favorite in the National League East that year, it certainly had to be the Cubs. And, it just seemed like that was quite a rivalry there. But, the Black Cat at Shea, and who knows? I don't know if you're a superstitious person or not.
That's right. Listen, we take everything into account, and
okay, but it
Black
just
Cat, that seemed to work for us, and we were happy. Not against us.
Sure. And then something brand new, never before in the National League, and the playoffs against the Atlanta Braves, the Western Division champions, and boom, 1, 2, 3. I think it was 50 years ago yesterday, as we're speaking, that they swept them 3 straight, and it was then about a 5-day break, if I'm right, and then the World Series began in Baltimore. And again, you look. The ace of the mound staff, Tom Seaver, is going in game 1, and they lose. And the after game comments again that your dad displayed just unshakable faith in the team, and he said something like, if we were looking at a 4-game deficit, then I'd be worried, because of course the series would be over. Very matter of fact, and a little bit, I've always sensed in him a little bit of that dry humor that is kind of so common of Midwesterners.
Definitely for him.
Yeah. And then they came back, and can I ask how many of the... Yep. Were you able to attend all the games in person?
Yes. We went to all the games. We flew to Baltimore. We stayed in Baltimore. And then we came home, and we were at the games in New York, of course. I remember because the last game, we sat in the box. The manager's box was right next to the dugout. And it was my mother, my brother, myself. I don't think Cindy was there. I don't remember. Barbara was little. And by the end of the game, when they knew that they were going to win this game, we were surrounded by police with guns out, because it was just, the stadium was already shaking from them carrying on. I mean, you could actually feel the stadium shaking. Wow. It was tremendous. It was really tremendous. And it was just so memorable, so much so.
Yeah, I imagine it is written in your memory and your heart for all time.
Oh, yes. And
I just go back.
His excitement was just, you couldn't contain it. You could not contain it. And every player coming into that office and shaking his hands. And he had differences with some of his players. And it's so funny because some of them years later have come out and said he was so right. Why didn't I listen to him then? Because they were all young. They were all young kids.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen some of that, that I was a headstrong young kid and I wish I had known better. My feeling is he was never out to be liked by everybody, and really no manager ever is going to be. What was it? I think Casey Stengel once said the biggest job of a manager, he said, 1/3 of the guys love you, 1/3 of the guys hate you, and your job is the other third haven't decided, and to keep that third away from the guys who hate you. And
that sounds like him.
Yeah, but that your dad expected respect and, as you said, the very best effort possible out of each player. And another thing I think is, it seems like he was completely honest with them and had very good, clear communication with them about what their role was. And you read about other teams, other players, and they feel, even players who said, I felt like I was in the dark. I never knew what was going on. And that's something I see again in poor leaders in other organizations, but not your dad.
No, you knew exactly what he expected, what he wanted, and what he would accept, because he didn't accept anything less. Excuse me.
And, earlier this summer I went back. It's available on YouTube. I wish the whole World Series was available, but at least they have all of Game 5. And, you can't feel the stadium shaking, but you can sure get a sense of the anticipation of the fans. And, just what a magical, wonderful moment to go in the space of 7 years. Their team went from worst to first, and then that great explosion of joy. And watching then when the NBC camera cut to people entering the clubhouse, and some of them, these are young men in their 20s. I mean, they're literally leaping for joy. And
of
then...
course.
Totally understand. And then the very last man in uniform into the clubhouse was your dad, because he wanted the players to have the spotlight, don't you think?
Absolutely. 100. Even when the players went on the Ed Sullivan show and sang, "You have to have heart." My dad.
I remember that.
My dad sat in the audience with my mother and said, "This is their time." Everything was for them. Everything was their work, their hard work, and would never take anything away from that. So.
Yeah, but I noticed when he did enter the clubhouse, what a beautiful, beautiful smile was on his face.
Right?
Yep.
That smile was on his face the whole day, the whole night.
I imagine so. And like when he was talking to Lindsey Nelson, and of course he was so gracious, just thanking everybody, the management, the players, the fans. And then he said something like, it's been a tremendous year, and thank God it's over, which said to me, he kept the smile, but a sense of joy, but would you say maybe a real sense of relief that now whatever the pressure was over and that the deed had been done?
I know for sure. The more you win, the more people expect you to win. And the more you want to win. So the anticipation and the drive to get there every game it's a very long season. Baseball is huge. So I think he was exhausted. I think physically and mentally it's a grueling game. And in New York, it's even harder. Because New York fans are the best, without a doubt, but they know the game. They know what to expect. And he always wanted to give them that. He wanted them to be happy.
Yeah, and another aspect I think we talked about on the prior program, in Washington, there were maybe 3 reporters covering the team, and in New York, of course, between newspapers, radio, and television, there was a small army covering the team, and that added a different dimension. But
there's nothing like New York. There's nothing like New York. I mean, even Los Angeles, which is a great baseball city, New York is New York. You can't compare any place to us.
No, I would agree. I mean, I still have a vivid memory of my very first Mets game in person.
Mm-hmm.
It was late in the season. They were out of contention, but there were still close to 30,000 people in the stands. And, I've been to games in several major league parks, but I had never seen, I'm going to say probably 40% of the fans were wearing Mets shirts, jackets, or caps. I've never seen anywhere close to that number of people in a ballpark wearing team gear. So that really reflects commitment, I think. And
Absolutely.
Yep. And true fans stay with their team through the good years and the lean years.
Yep.
So, Irene, we've been talking for close to half an hour. I just wonder, let's see, maybe any reflections on the fact, as a fan, I think it has just been wonderful all season long, all the remembrances of 1969, and for those of us who were lucky enough to know your dad as a manager or a player, that it's been great to have this regular reminders of what a special person he was, and maybe hopefully it's introduced some of the younger generation to him. But your feeling in all these nice tributes that really been here kind of all summer long.
It has been a wonderful year for remembering the 69 Mets, seeing them at dinners and reliving. Baseball players have the best stories. They
Yeah.
tell you the best stories ever, and you could listen to them over and over again. So all that has been a blessing. My one very sad part of this all is Tom Seaver.
Oh,
and
yes.
That's a very big heartbreak for me and my family. So I don't do anything without remembering him and praying for him and his family.
Yeah.
But
And
with that, it's been a wonderful, wonderful year.
Yeah. Again, your dad was my favorite player and manager. Tom was my favorite pitcher. And when the news about his dementia came out, I found myself in tears. And I remember, I think I posted a picture of a young Mets fan after a loss crying, and I said, oh gosh, I know we're all mortal, but not Tom, please not Tom. But I know the bond between Tom and your dad was amazing and very special. Yeah. Just a final thought, although your dad's been gone very many years, too many years, that your mom, Joan Hodges, she is still with us, and she celebrated a birthday recently. And tell us, if you could, how she's doing.
She's doing remarkably well. Thank you.
Well,
she has only age-related problems, health-wise. And besides that, I am very grateful that she does so well. So she was able to enjoy her birthday with her children and grandchildren and her great-grandchildren. So she's doing very, very well. Thank you, Bill.
Oh, that's great. Well, Irene, I've probably taken enough of your time, and we're at the half-hour mark, so I will thank you again so very much for taking the time to be on Claire's Corner today.
Claire, it has always been my pleasure. Thank you, always.
And to everybody listening, until we meet again, happy trails.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.